Evening, everyone. We'll just wait another minute because quite a number of people are joining as we're speaking. "130 people so far joined.
You have to start again, Sam.
Okay, good evening, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Gary Mond. I'm the chairman of the National Jewish Assembly.
Gary Mond.
Yeah, we're now 2 years old, and
Why is Gary muted?
all right, I'm not muted now. Am I muted?
No, not now, Gary.
All right, great. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Gary Mond. I'm the chairman of the National Jewish Assembly. It's our great pleasure this evening to welcome Professor Avi Bell, who's going to talk to us about Israel and the ICC. Before then, I just remind you all that I think most of you are probably members, but for the few of you who are not members, please could you join at our website, www.nja.org.uk. It's only £10 a year if you give us a direct debit. And while you're getting quite a number of people invited to meetings, even if they're not members, there are meetings we have which are members only, and you really don't want to miss out for such a tiny sum of money. We are growing now. We're over 600 members, and we're aiming to be 1,000 members in the coming year. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Professor Avi Bell. Professor Bell is a professor of law at the law school of Bar Ilan University and also of the University of San Diego. He clerked for Justice Minister Michal Cheshin of the Supreme Court of Israel and for the High Court of Justice Department within the Israeli State Attorney's Office, and he's a veteran of the IDF. Professor Bell is a highly sought-after expert on international law, particularly the laws of war and the Arab-Israeli conflict. He's advised officials on 4 different continents and has published articles on a variety of subjects. And he's also a critique of the Goldstone Report and its treatment of international humanitarian law and the mythical post-2005 Israeli occupation, or what occupation I say, of the Gaza Strip, together with his colleague Dov Sheffi. Professor Bell studied at the University of Chicago and Harvard University, and it's my very, very great pleasure to introduce him to you. He'll probably speak for 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll throw it open for questions. And please remember, if you want to ask a question, please could you raise your virtual hand by clicking the button near the bottom of your screen which says raise hand, and then I will call you. Please don't just wave your arms in the air that some people do sometimes, because I won't see you. Okay, Professor Bell, off you go.
All right, thank you very, very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you virtually, and we discussed this a little bit before we opened it up to the audience. My plan is not to speak too long. I prefer to have our discussion driven by whatever it is that concerns our audience. So let me just lay the framework for our conversation. I want to speak about not only about the ICC, but a little bit about the ICJ as well. What we have to understand is that Israel right now is under a lawfare attack. That is, there's a group of proceedings going on in these 2 courts in The Hague, the ICC and the ICJ. Also in a number of UN, not court, but UN institutions, Human Rights Council, the General Assembly, etc. We also have, in parallel, efforts going on in a number of states, primarily in Europe, but also you can see actions going on in places like Canada. Now, there are 2 time frameworks in which we can examine these. One of them is the longer term. This is the fruition of a long-term strategy of the PLO to carry out legal warfare against the Jewish state. It's known in particular as the brainchild of the current president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, who is heading towards his 20th year in his 4-year term. And Abbas wrote about 10 years ago in the New York Times about his efforts to have Palestine become a state in the UN system, that is, to get accepted by the Security Council and then voted in as a member of the United Nations. And he's expressed this as a hope to be a platform for efforts of the Palestinians to carry out legal and diplomatic warfare against the Jewish state. He actually put it in those terms to bring the conflict into the legal and diplomatic arenas. And in that sense, what we're looking at is the fruition of a long process. Now, I can say, for example, in the ICC, the PLO asked to give jurisdiction to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, in 2009. And it's been carrying on negotiations with the prosecutors of the International Criminal Court since then. It took about 5 years, a little bit more, to cook up a theory by which the ICC would accept jurisdiction. Eventually it did, even though it's contrary to the law. In 2015, the ICC launched a preliminary investigation against Israel. And after 6 years of preliminary investigation, or about after 5 years and a little bit, it was graduated to a full-scale investigation in 2021. And now we've seen the first request of the ICC for criminal charges against Israelis. It won't be the last. And in that sense, we're looking at a long-term process. In the ICJ, it's a little bit less clear about, but the PLO has been steadily looking for more and more opportunities to bring this before the ICJ. The ICJ had already ruled in 2004 that Israel has no right to defend itself against Palestinian terrorism. And so where the ICJ stands in these issues is fairly clear. Right now, we have 4 different proceedings in the ICJ against Israel, 2 directly and 2 by proxy. And there will be more. And so this too, we're talking about a long-term project. Now, but there's a shorter-term sense in which this is this project is going on, and that's in relationship to the current war. I mean, it's no secret that the strategy of Hamas, the terrorist organization that was the main Palestinian terrorist organization that attacked Israel and Israeli civilians on October 7th, was not to destroy Israel by its military prowess, but to stoke a larger war, where the larger war was supposed to be carried on by supporters of Palestinian jihad in the larger Middle East, and beyond that by supporters of the Palestinians in the Western world. Now, as it turns out, the efforts in part of Hamas were a complete failure. That is, they intended to lift the spirit of the fighting jihad in the Middle East. That didn't happen. Nobody's entered the fighting except for Iran and Iranian proxies. And they hoped to break the fighting spirit of Israeli Jews, and they failed to do that as well. But they encountered enormous success in the West. In the West, the Hamas has successfully lit the fires of jihad, and you have large portions of the Western world that are now happy to rally to the banner of Palestinian terrorists in trying to destroy Israel. Some of it is just through retail anti-Semitic actions, violence against Jews on the streets, harassment, intimidation, attacks in synagogues, attacks on Jewish students in universities, etc. And some of it is through joining with the PLO's battle in diplomatic and legal warfare. Now, There is one last item that we have to look at when we look at how this legal warfare is going, and that is the specific successes that they've had. And they've had a number of successes in the past few weeks. The ICC prosecutor announced after a long period of time that he wanted to impose criminal charges on the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister of Israel, on the way to more criminal charges against Israelis later, in addition to some fig leaf charges against Palestinian terrorists that everyone understands will never get to see the inside of a courtroom. And the ICJ entertaining the preposterous South African claim that Israel is carrying out a genocide against the Palestinians. This is basically a South African attempt to support Hamas's attempted genocide and genocidal acts against Jews. Entertaining this preposterous claim, the ICJ has put out a series of interim orders, and that's of course where it's going to end, because the ICJ is not going to ultimately rule that there's a genocide committed by Israel. Even that is a step too far, even for the ICJ. But there have been a series of interim orders that have been issued from the ICJ, and there too, there are going to be more. Now, if you look at the specifics of these orders, the ICC, the criminal charges that it wants to level against the Israeli leaders is primarily on two things. It is a claim that Israel has not provided sufficient or timely enough humanitarian assistance. And the other charge is that Israel has not been careful enough, that it has killed too many civilians. Now, both of these should sound familiar to you because these are two of the central claims that the Biden administration has endorsed against Israel. Now, they're not claims from way back when the ICC started investigating. These are not claims that showed up in the preliminary investigation. They're not claims that have showed up in the investigation since 2021. They're new, and they're very plainly an attempt to make the criminal charges sound palatable to the Biden administration. The same thing can be said of the ICJ. The ICJ's interim orders, particularly the last one in which it gave Israel's orders about the fighting in Rafah, right, or Rafah, however you want to call it. That too should sound familiar because this follows a series of statements by the Biden administration about precisely that issue. And so what you're looking at is an attempt by the ICJ and the ICC, even though they're carrying out this long-term attack in Israel that was launched many years ago, many decades ago, even one could say. The particulars of it are designed to attract, if they can, support or at least non-action by the United States. Now, as far as the legal charges themselves, they're preposterous. I'll be happy to talk about the particulars if anybody wants me to afterwards. But I think that it's a mistake to give them even the dignity of being described as legal arguments. They're not really. They're farcical political charges. But of course, that's not the point of them, right? The point is not to engage in a legal process. This is political theater. It's political theater by the ICJ, and it's political theater in particular by the ICC. That's one of the things that has changed since Karim Khan became prosecutor of the ICC several years ago. Prior to that, the ICC tended to try to bring cases where it had a reasonable prospect of success in court, and it is abandoned that under Karim Khan. Karim Khan goes for the big political splash, even if nothing is going to happen at the end of it. The first time he did this was in charges against Vladimir Putin of Russia, where it's quite clear those two will never see the inside of a courtroom. It was designed to be popular and populist. There I can say, at least in their favor, even though the ICC clearly does not have jurisdiction, one can say that the charges are not clearly fabricated the way they are in the case of Israel. In the case of Israel, the charges are not only fabricated, but they're completely without jurisdiction. But again, because this is political theater, it's very clear that the point is not to win in a court of law. They won't win in a court of law. The point is simply to make the political splash. Now, the last thing to say about this before I let the audience take control and push me to wherever we want to go is to understand how it is that we ought to think about this challenge and what we ought to do about it. Now, in a way, the way to think about this is what we are looking at is the collapse of the institutions of what some like to call the liberal world order, or an attempt to create an order, an international law order in the world. And we're watching these institutions unravel under the dual problems of ineffectiveness and bias. Right? Unable to do anything about real problems. Instead, what we're seeing is them promoting and acting according to the world's, at least the Western world's, oldest prejudice. And this is a process that's happened before. There was a set of international institutions that were created after World War I. And in the 1930s, they slowly and then more quickly unraveled. To the point where after World War II was over, it was fairly clear that they were not. Good night. Sorry about that. The co-lecturer wanted to say good night to me. By the end of World War II, it's clear that those institutions were gone and they would have to be replaced. I don't know at what point this unraveling is going to end, but it's very clear that we're seeing the unraveling. But in the meantime, these institutions are capable of doing a lot of mischief, and they are. And it's important for us, if we want to defend anything like a rules-based order, it is very important to fight these institutions because they are burying the reputation and the effectiveness of any international legal order by perverting the law in order to promote the agenda of barbaric terrorist organizations and to pursue prejudice against the Jewish people. Now, this has been the case in the United Nations for quite a number of years. Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General, said so openly that the United Nations protects all the world's people except for the Jews. And now that's obviously the same. Same is true of the ICJ and the ICC. And it's, if you want to save any rule of law, you have to force these institutions to exit the scene, or at least to change all of their personnel. But it's also it's important for Israel, for the Jewish state, for the Jewish people, not to allow these Dreyfus trials to take place and to get to completion. I think it's very important. I think most Israeli leaders understand, most of them understand, not all, but understand that it's important not to participate in this farce. You're giving show trials the dignity of legal proceedings, and that's a big mistake. But beyond that, it's important to impose price on the individuals and the institutions that are carrying out these perversions of justice. The United States used a strategy like this with success a few years ago against the former prosecutor of the ICC and forced her to back down from charges. It started in the period of Bensouda and then continued into the period of Karim Khan, but the sanctions eventually forced the ICC to back off charges that it was going to make without jurisdiction against Americans. And it's important for people of good conscience to do the same with the ICC now to impose a cost, both on the ICC and the ICJ, for these perversions of justice. It may cause these institutions to take a step back. At the very least, it'll slow down the process of their self-destruction, which is going to take, unfortunately, many of us down with it. Okay, those are my preliminary remarks. I understand, Gary, you're going to control the flow.
I'm going to ask the first question. I see Daniela and Richard have put up their hands. I'll come to them in a moment, and Jake as well. And please keep the questions coming in. So my question, a little bit offbeat. We've been hearing some occasional noises in the past week from the Biden administration and from the Senate and from the House of Representatives in Congress of sanctions of some sort being taken against the ICC. The words we occasionally hear are things like travel bans and freezing bank accounts. Is this all hot air, or might they actually do something? I think many of us might look forward to the day when Amal Clooney has her bank account frozen. I'm wondering, is it hot air or is there substance to it? What do you think?
So there's most certainly substance to it, and I'll tell you exactly what the model is here. During the Trump administration, when the then prosecutor Fatou Bensouda was cooking up charges against Americans, Trump issued an executive order placing sanctions, travel bans, and freezing assets on Bensouda and several of her aides, and that was a step, as I said, that was enormously effective. Right? Eventually, the ICC prosecutor's office decided that this particular political show was not worth the price, and they dropped the charges. And so there definitely are people in the Senate and the House that are interested in reviving these kinds of sanctions, personal sanctions against the ICC prosecutor and the staff, and using the model of the Trump sanctions, banking sanctions, asset sanctions, and travel bans. I actually think that it's possible to go way past that. I think that the prosecutor is engaged in a variety of acts that can plausibly be interpreted as criminal, extortion, threatened kidnapping, etc. And it would be nice to see the ICC prosecutor facing criminal charges for his criminal acts when he's threatening to bring show criminal actions against non-criminals. But there's some political stumbling blocks in the way. There's a gap between the Democrats and the Republicans in the United States on their position on Israel. And so it's fairly clear that the Republicans are more eager to impose sanctions than Democrats are. But I will say that Democrats generally have not had a very favorable attitude towards the ICC in the United States either. They see that it's an institution that overreaches, that doesn't bring justice, and is more of a political cudgel. And there are people of goodwill elsewhere in the Western world. I believe that sanctions are a very plausible, may even likely outcome of these actions, but in part it depends on us. We have to stick to it.
Right, delighted to see we now have 6 questions. Daniela Magdovic, you were the first. Please unmute and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much. What is bothering me is that Qatar, just a week prior to the judgment, has given them a boat as a gift. And it feels like, to me, that the court seems terribly corrupted to even accept such a gift. Is that like a card that Israel could pull in terms of, saying something about the impartiality of the courts? Is that not something that Israel can do, or have any other legal cards that they could pull that would maybe,
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying. I think that let's understand something, that there's a difference between legal arguments that you can make inside the court, the ICC, and legal arguments that you can make elsewhere inside real legal systems, like a U.S. courtroom. Okay, so I think there's no doubt that the personnel of the court are corrupt. That is, no, I think we can leave it at that they are corrupt. That said, it's very clear that no matter what happens, it will never occur that within the courtroom of the ICC, that the court will ever find its own personnel to be guilty of anything. It's just not going to happen. And so it's pointless to make these arguments. So if you go to the court and argue, wait, the prosecutor has no jurisdiction. This court has no jurisdiction. The court is in a position of a conflict of interest. It's in a position of corruption. It's committed criminal acts in order to get here. It's illegally obtained evidence. It's done whatever else, right? Those are kinds of arguments will have no impact whatsoever on the court, because the court, again, it's not a legal institution, it's a political institution. And so they don't care. Now, on the other hand, it is possible to bring charges against the court personnel, the prosecutor and personnel, in a real legal institution. Again, a courtroom in the United States, possibly courtrooms in Britain, right? And there, it's actually possible to entertain legal charges. It's just that in such a case, corruption is not your best bet. What you're interested in are crimes over which that relevant court would have jurisdiction. So if you want to bring charges, let's say, against the prosecutor in the United States, there has to be an American victim of a crime committed by the prosecutor. Now, I think you can show such things, right? You can show that there are potential American victims of such crimes. I think you can show that there is certainly Israeli victims of such crimes. I'm not confident that Israeli prosecutors have the courage that the American prosecutors will show. But yeah, those kinds of things are possible. Corruption is not the best angle on this.
Okay, thank you very much. Richard Galba, you're next. Please come off mute.
Thanks, Avi. A question. I've watched quite a lot of programs with you and Natasha, etc., and I've got a fairly good idea of what's going on. But I don't read the Hebrew press, so I don't know what the Israelis are doing as far as fighting this. But I get the impression that they have been for many years very inept at confronting these attacks, because these, as you say, are not new. They've been building up for years. But I never hear anything about the Israelis actually trying to do it. Are you aware of anything, or have you got any opinion on that?
Yeah, so there's so far in Israel, the main line of response has been handled by the professional bureaucracy, the professional diplomatic and legal bureaucracy. And I think that the response has been incredibly naive. Those teams, the legal and diplomatic teams that have been in charge of this, have tried to cooperate with the prosecutors at the ICC and with their staff in an attempt to try to dissuade and slightly move the process to something less harmful, without great success. And with the ICJ, there's been partial cooperation, which Israel has tried to make legal arguments to the court through proxy, or sometimes in the South African case directly. And even the Israelis have even announced in compliance with these orders, these interim orders that have been made by the ICJ. And I think that is a terrible, terrible strategy. I think that it's blowing up in Israel's face. I can say that it's not the strategy that I think that the elected officials of Israel would adopt if it were up to them. But as of yet, we haven't seen the elected officials take charge, push aside the bureaucratic team and take more aggressive action. So all these things that the Americans have done, Israel has not done. The United States is very aggressive legislation already on the books, forbidding cooperating with the ICC, announcing that the United States will use military force if necessary to liberate people who are taken into custody by the ICC if they dare lay their hands on an American, and so on and so forth. These are not things that have happened in Israel. Israel's just not had. It's not a question of ineptitude. I think it's a question of lack of courage. And I think that it's time to be a little bit more courageous, because the old strategy, the appeasement strategy, has clearly not worked.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next questioner is Jake Tash. Jake, if you could come off mute, and ideally if you could turn your camera on, that would also be nice. Jake. Hi, Jake.
Hello, thank you. My question is, Hamas seem to be fighting a war on two fronts, both a military war and a PR/media war. Is there anything that Israel can do, such as improve their PR strategy in order to appeal to some not morally corrupt people within the court that can turn the tide in Israel's favor and not send Hamas scampering back with their calls of war crimes?
I don't think that there are any real options to change minds on the court, either the ICC or the ICJ. Now, it's possible around the margins. It's possible to get one or two judges to see reason. And so in the ICJ so far, if you read the opinions of the Ugandan judge, she's been very good, and she's seen through this farce for the most part. And so she's written her opinions. But of course, there are 15 to 17 judges, depending on the configuration. And it's not plausible that there's going to be a majority that's going to be reasonable. In the ICC, they're panels of three, but it's a small group of people. They have a record. They're not going to see reason. So I think that's not a realistic strategy. I think that it's absolutely true what you said, that we're looking at a part of the Hamas battle strategy involves PR, and they've been very successful at it so far. I think that it's a mistake to think that the success is due to lack of Israeli efforts. The reason the BBC is biased against Israel is not because someone in Israel has fallen down on their job. I think that if you had the most brilliant minds running the PR strategy in Israel, the BBC would be the BBC. It would not change. It's simply one of the battle conditions that you have to accept. That there are news organizations like the BBC, that are committed to presenting a certain narrative and trying to get a certain side to win. And the fact that side is a genocidal anti-Semitic terrorist group is very, very unfortunate for us. But that's not going to move the BBC. I think the BBC is going to be where it is. And so what can you do? I actually think that here too, it's possible to take more aggressive steps to the degree that there are steps that organizations like the BBC or CNN or others are taking that constitute material support for terrorist organizations. And I think there are. Right. You can see this more with organizations like AP, Associated Press, where they had photographers and journalists embedded within terrorist cells. Right. To the degree they're taking steps that constitute material support for terrorist organizations, it's possible to take legal action against them. And I would strongly urge everyone who has some influence in such things to start pushing in that direction. Now, this is not going to be this can happen in any country where there are sufficient laws on material support. So the United States, Britain, Canada, right, Germany, France. Now, the problem, of course, is that you either have to find a friendly official or you have to find a courtroom where you can get a fair hearing. But it is possible, right? It's not. It's you do not need to convince 100% of the people. You don't need to convince 51% of the people. You need to convince a few people with a sense of their job, and so one U.S. attorney will bring charges is enough.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next questioner is Elliot Davis. Elliot, could you come off mute and preferably, if you're happy to do so, turn your camera on so we can see you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure how to turn the camera on, but please don't be offended. That's not because I'm unwilling to. My question is, so Ireland, Norway, and Spain recognised a Palestinian state, air commas. Does this have any legitimacy and will it have any material effect? And indeed, is it in any way binding? And if not, what would constitute binding international law in regards Israel and any would-be Palestinian state?
All right. So here's on the 1 second version, the 1 minute version of the law of statehood. Right, how one becomes a state. So it's generally accepted in the world that there's a 4-part formula for being a state under international law. It's found in paragraph 1 of the Montevideo Convention on Inter-American Affairs, and it basically says that in order to be a state, you have to have territory, a population, a government, and the capacity to carry on foreign relations. It's fairly clear that the PLO has never had all 4 ingredients together. In fact, that it's argued, even what is quite preposterous, that that it has never had jurisdiction as a government over any territory whatsoever. Right, that it's always been subject to an occupation, the way they put it. And so it's very clear they've never met the requirements. Now, there is a school of thought among international lawyers that in addition to these 4 elements, there's a 5th element that must be met in order to be a state, which is in addition to being a state, you have to be recognized as such by other states. And this is the so-called theory of constitutive recognition of statehood. Sometimes people will say, well, that this is when, if you're accepted by the United Nations as a member, then you're clearly recognized as a state. Some will say, no, just look at how many states have recognized you. Now, the PLO has been recognized as the state of Palestine by a little over 3/4 of the world's countries. And so with or without these 3 states, the Palestinians already have a large amount of recognition, perhaps enough that it would constitute enough for those who think that recognition is the 5th required element. But there are 2 other missing elements. Now, does this make a difference? The reason that the PLO has launched its efforts to be recognized as a state is twofold. The one is openly stated. This is in order to help the Palestinians engage in their legal and diplomatic warfare against the Jewish state. That's what Abbas declared in that New York Times editorial that I mentioned. And this is marginal importance because the Palestinians have already been so successful in their efforts in diplomatic and legal warfare to date. The other thing that it's designed to do is it's designed to express support for the Palestinian organizations, the terrorist organizations that want to set aside Israel and to delegitimize the state of Israel. It's quite successful at that. And the more recognitions we see of Palestine, the more you can say that the Palestinian terrorist organizations are succeeding in their efforts to acquire legitimacy and to delegitimize the Jewish state that is quite openly what the let's say the Spanish government is aiming at. It's describing this as a blow against Israel and a blow on behalf of the Palestinians. And it's therefore politically important in that sense. But legally, it doesn't have very much importance. The damage has already been done.
Thank you very much. Our next questioner is Les Bloom. Please come off mute, Les, and ask your question.
Oh, hi. Yeah, nice to talk to you. Thank you very much. I think, Jake, your previous questioner might have said what I'm going to say partly, but my question is, do you think that the court is overly swayed by social media, etc.? That's my question, but just a little bit of preface to that. It seems to me that Israel might be winning militarily, but they're certainly not winning in terms of the internet. They seem to be not doing good on that. The other thing I wanted to say is the other side seem to have nice little slogans like "River to the Sea," "Genocide," and "Apartheid State." You know, they go shouting that from the rooftop. So do you think we need a slogan? And if so, would "Let My People Go" would that be a good slogan?
So I'm not a marketing person. I think that it would be very useful to have modern social media campaigns to make Israel's case, to make the case for the Jewish people, to make the case against the terrorists who committed the atrocities of October 7th and would do them again and again if they had the opportunity. I don't think it has to be centralized. Right? We live in a democratic society in which messaging can be done by everyone, and you're welcome to do this. I would be happy to assist you to the degree that you have the skills, and if you don't, then let's find somebody else to do it. I think that is important. That said, I think it's also important to recognize that the media environment is unfriendly to us for a variety of reasons that have nothing to do with our skill. And maybe the most important one is that social media is a visceral medium, right? And it therefore works very well when it plays upon pre-existing prejudice. And unfortunately, there is a pre-existing prejudice in the case of the Jewish people, in the case of the Jewish state. There's a lot to play with there. And so visceral messaging can work much better when it's reinforcing people's prejudices than when it's trying to work against them. Now, if you go to what degree is this influencing the ICC, the ICJ, I don't think it's the social media at all. I think that what you're looking at is an expression of the prejudice of the personnel, but you're more looking at their reading of the political scene. And their reading of the political scene is that these are useful political theater to launch, primarily because they are ineffective and have no real ability to change anything. And therefore, show trials are the best way to try to recruit people to support them, because they pick an unpopular victim and then they victimize them. And this is a way to draw support for what they're doing. I think you can draw up the most magnificent pro-Israel social media campaign. It will have no effect whatsoever in the ICC, no effect whatsoever in the ICJ. If you take their bank accounts, that'll have an effect on them.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Les. Next questioner is Dawn Friedman. Dawn, please can you come off mute, and please can you, if possible, put your camera on. Dawn, are you there?
I don't know how.
There you are. Hi, lovely seeing you, Dawn.
My question is was it not a founding principle?
You don't have an earpiece. This is not going to work. You've got an echo.
Is it not a founding principle of the International Court?
No, we can't. Sorry, Dawn, to interrupt you. Your microphone is giving a lot of audio feedback to the point that it's very painful to hear. do you want to put your question in the chat and we will ask it directly to?
I have put it.
Okay, I've got it, and we'll put it to Dr. Bell.
Dawn, I have
Professor Bell.
Dawn's
Sorry
question.
about that. Thank you.
I have Dawn's question for Avi. Dawn wants to ask, is the ICC under an obligation to allow a country with the rule of law and independent judiciary to try so-called war criminals?
Yeah, this is a matter of some discussion in Israel recently. So there's a lot of reasons why the ICC doesn't have the jurisdiction to judge the Israelis over these non-crimes, right? So let's just understand there are two different problems with the ICC proposed criminal charges. The first, and I don't know if it's a more important one, the first one is that the acts that are described by the ICC as criminal actually don't violate the law, right? So there's no crimes being committed, not by Israelis. Of course, the acts that they're describing by the Hamas terrorists are, of course, crimes. But the other problem is that the ICC lacks jurisdiction. It lacks jurisdiction for a number of reasons. Now, one of the reasons is that the ICC only has jurisdiction over crimes committed on the territory of a state party or crimes committed by nationals of a state party. And Israel is not a state party. And the crimes are not being committed on the territory of a state that's a party to the ICC. And so there's no jurisdiction there. The ICC went through this entire rigmarole in which it cooked up statehood for the Palestinians in order to exercise jurisdiction for alleged crimes committed on the territory of Palestine. All this in order to charge Israelis. But there are other blocks to the jurisdiction of the court. One of them is so-called gravity. They're not supposed to consider charges unless they're the most grievous imaginable. So the atrocities committed by the Hamas terrorists, yes, that would be grievous. You had a little bit of a circus a few years ago in the ICC where the Comoros Island tried to bring charges against Israel for boarding a ship, the Mavi Marmara, while enforcing a blockade. It was very clear, I think, that Israel committed no crimes, and even if the Israelis had committed crimes, they're not of the gravity that the court should entertain. The prosecutor at the time was not interested in going down this rabbit hole, tried to close the case on the grounds of gravity. The ICC ordered her twice to go back and reconsider her decision. Eventually, they allowed it to fall. But I think that this is a court that's not particularly interested in finding or recognizing limits on its own jurisdiction. It is interested in exercising its authority, even when it's completely imagined, even when it's completely made up. No arguments in the grounds of jurisdiction are ever going to succeed when they want to prosecute Israeli Jews. Now, that brings us to your question. You're asking about something that's called complementarity. And so the general rule of complementarity in the Rome Statute of the ICC is that the court lacks jurisdiction if there was a prior proceeding, a genuine proceeding in the state of the accused, and that should mean, if they had any respect for the law, that because all these various claims of war crimes are investigated and where necessary prosecuted in Israel, there's nothing over which the ICC has jurisdiction. That said, there's always been a very simple answer for the ICC for this, and it is the one that Karim Khan has said in interviews, which is they'll just deny the legitimacy of the Israeli proceedings, and that's the end of that, right? So they have no problem lying about Israeli courts any more than they had a problem lying about gravity, or any more than they had a problem lying about the crimes themselves, or any more than they had a problem lying about Palestinian statehood. It's a fake process all the way through. Nonetheless, I think for domestic political reasons in Israel, there have been a number of legal authorities in Israel that have loudly proclaimed that the judicial proceedings in Israel constitute a bulletproof vest for all Israeli officials. As long as there are genuine proceedings in Israel, as long as the judiciary in Israel enjoys outsized power, no Israeli can ever be touched. And that theory has been, I think, completely demolished in recent weeks. The ICC has no problem whatsoever cheating on this the way it cheats on everything else.
Thank you so much. Our next questioner is Benjamin Tam. And before I call Benjamin, I'm delighted to see we've got at least another 4 or 5 questions after Benjamin. Benjamin, you're off mute.
Thank you very much. I think what's happening here is a fact. Prove it legal. The ICC themselves, they are criminals, bureaucratic criminals. They were created to use people to commit war crimes. Hamas is what their leaders are worth about 5 billion each, and they're trying to buy their way out to safety. It happened in Africa. Charles Taylor of Liberia, after this program, everybody can go and look up to him. Charles Taylor was used by UN to commit war crimes in Liberia and Sierra Leone. And right about the time the Africans were going to charge him with war crime, the ICC rescued him away. He used diamonds that he mined from Sierra Leone to buy his way to safety. And now he's in prison in Durham or Milton Keynes somewhere. He's living lavish life in prison. That's what the ICC does. These Hamas leaders have committed war crimes on October 7th. And the ICC is looking at the money they've got. These people have billions of money they've made from Palestinians since the day they were elected to power till now. And this money is what they are using to buy Ireland, they are using to buy South Africa, and Uganda, and all these nations you are looking at. They bought them billions of dollars, and they are using that money to buy themselves to safety. Because if you are looking at what happened to the Iranian president, they don't want that to happen to them. So they are buying themselves to safety.
Benjamin, please, can you ask the question?
And to make it look real, they've just added Benjamin Netanyahu into the arrest warrant so that Israel will back off. Am I wrong? To me, that's what I think is happening.
The ICC's history, is particularly in Africa, has been cooperating with one set of criminals against another set of criminals. And what the ICC is now doing with Israel is it's taking the next step, and it's cooperating with one group of criminals in order to prosecute the innocent. Now, I don't think that the primary reason in the case of Israel is money corruption. I think that it is prejudice. And I don't think, by the way, that it's primarily the prejudice of the personnel in the court. It is more feeding the prejudice of those they think are the supporters of the court and the funders of the court. They're feeding what they think are their prejudices, what they want to get, and I think they're not wrong, right? That is, the funders of the court are themselves have, in many cases, a significant record of prejudice along exactly the lines that the ICC is serving.
Thank you.
So there's one.
So I need to move on to the next question, Benjamin. Thank you. Teresa Gleitman. Teresa.
Hi. Recently, 160 lawyers from around the world, coordinated by the Israel Law Center, sent a letter to Secretary of State Blinken and others, alleging in essence that the case that South Africa brought to the ICJ was done on the basis of corruption, that they were paid by Iran to do this. Does this have any merit, and does it have any legs? They want America to investigate this.
So, does it have merit? I don't know. I don't have myself sufficient information to know. It seems to me perfectly plausible, but it's a serious charge that before I would endorse it, I would want to have a better look at the evidence. Second, is this a useful line of attack? And I think it's not the best. And the reason that it's not the best, I think that's perfectly a good idea to reveal the truth about what's behind the South African campaign to cooperate with a genocidal anti-Semitic terrorist organization, but it's not entirely clear to me what the crime is that an American court would have jurisdiction over here. I'm quite certain that if you want to convince somebody to do something about it, Tony Blinken is not the guy. Right? He's not particularly interested. As I said, I think that the ICJ, like the ICC, have one eye on the Biden administration. What they're trying to do with the orders and the criminal charges is to work within what they think is the realm of steps that will not cause the United States to react in too tough a fashion. Right. So I think that they're trying to work within the propaganda lines that the Biden administration has endorsed, the pro-Palestinian propaganda lines that the Biden administration has endorsed. So I think it's important information. I want to look into it more. I think it is, it's important for us to know, and I think it's also important as far as just public discussion for us to highlight as much as possible the corruption behind these processes. That said, I doubt that this is going very much of anywhere. I don't think, I think we have to take stronger action to initiate criminal processes in a variety of states against the ICC, against the ICJ and their personnel. And I don't think this is the angle that's going to do it.
Thank you so much.
Can I just point out, it was sent to congressional leaders as well as to Blinken, apparently.
Okay, our next questioner is my good friend Peter Baum. Peter, please come off mute and ask your question.
Hi there. Would a Trump victory dramatically change the dynamics?
The Biden administration has pursued a policy that's surprisingly hostile on a variety of measures towards Israel in this current war. Now, I wouldn't say it's uniformly hostile. There's some friendly aspects too, but there are a number of aspects that are quite hostile. I think that as I said, the ICC and the ICJ are picking up on that and trying to exploit it in the actions that they're taking. And if there's a change in administration in the United States, then it's quite possible there will be a new policy. That said, I'm going to try to avoid partisan politics beyond that. So please excuse me while I dodge your question.
Thank you. Our next questioner is Gary Portugal. Gary, come off mute. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Professor Bell. What, if anything, can we do collectively to do a more effective job at communicating to the world the enormous lengths that Israel goes to try to minimize civilian casualties? Because I think this is a lot of the crux of this. It's underappreciated how much Israel actually tries to do to save lives.
Yeah, this is a question that many Israelis ask themselves all the time, and I think it's the wrong question, because the accusations of crimes against Israel are not the result of ignorance; they're the result of prejudice. And the way people imagine the situation, the belief that Israel is willy-nilly murdering Palestinian civilians is not because they don't have information at their disposal. I think it's because they accept as a premise that Jews have evil, murdering motives, and then they interpret what they see in that light. And so for those people, and they are a large number of those people, and they're they have a huge media presence. there's no talking to them. There's no convincing them. There's no evidence they can receive that will change their minds. I had, when I was a student, this was 25 years ago. I was talking with another student. He was a Saudi. And we were talking about something, and he accused Israel of something, and I said, that's not the case. Let me explain to you what it really is like. And so he was interested. He said, I'd never heard that before. Can you show me something? And so I brought him some articles and some books, and I said, wow, let me talk to my imam about this. And he came back like, oh, we met for coffee again. And he said, yeah, we don't believe that. And that was the end of our discussion, right? That it's not a question of evidence. It's a question of prejudice. Now, how do you combat prejudice like that? The truth is, I think that you combat it by not taking it to be sincere. You attack its sincerity, right? You attack the prejudice rather than attacking on the lines of evidence. You call out people for their prejudice, and that's the thing that's more likely to break through, not to those people, they're lost causes, but to those who don't know what to think, right? With those people who don't know what to think, if you start arguing about whether or not I'm an axe murderer, the only thing they're going to remember is that I'm an axe murderer, right? Or that I'm accused of being an axe murderer. And I think that the better thing is to shift the focus to what's really going on here, which is their prejudice.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Our next questioner is John White. John, please come off mute.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. I noticed that the people participating tonight are of a certain age, and I noticed some of the comments people feel very depressed about the ICC. I'm going to ask a question, but I'd like to just posit some information about some of the characters who are requesting an arrest warrant. The first thing is, let's look at Karim Assad Ahmad Khan. His brother is a convicted paedophile, right? His brother was imprisoned. Now, in the common law system in this country, any judge who has a close family member who's convicted of a serious sex crime is debarred from being a judge. So that would seem to undermine the value of Karim Assad Khan sitting in the ICC. That's point one. So I think I'm giving this first to everybody listening tonight. Let's have some positive hope. And I don't want to enter into an ad hominem argument against these people, but let's look at who these people are who want to equate terrorists, murderers, and beasts with democratically elected leaders of a secular democracy, which is Israel. Now let's move on now. The second person who's asking for a warrant is a chisel-faced, anorectic Lebanese Druze woman who happens to be married to a film star. And again, under a judicial system in the United Kingdom, nobody would listen to a judge who could be subjectively swayed in their influence over a jury. So that's clear. The question is this: do we trust these people? But the question I have to ask is, I have to give you more information. And we've got Helena Kennedy, who's always been pro-Palestine and anti-Israel. And then lastly, we've got Elizabeth Wilmshurst, okay? Now, Elizabeth Wilmshurst was could have, should have, would have. She's just a myopic, senile old bag who looks down a retrospectoscope, and Golda Meir would have battered her. So the question is this to everybody: should we be frightened of these people? Should we actually give them any real credence? And my answer, I'm going to answer my question and say, with respect to Professor Bell, I don't give them any credence whatsoever. They've got no value. They're a tangential irrelevance. They are morally and legally bankrupt. But I am an uneducated man. I'm just a man of the street. Now, what do you say about that, Professor Bell? That's my question to you.
I think when you walk down the street, the people you have to be afraid of are the criminals, the ne'er-do-wells, the immoral people. You do not have to worry about the moral ones. So do we have to be worried about the ICC that's a rogues gallery? Yes, we do, because they're a rogues gallery.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next questioner is Mark Josephs. Mark.
Good evening. Thank you. My question for Professor Bell is regarding international law. Israel argues that it's acting in self-defense, a matter of necessity. Others will argue that Israel is acting disproportionately. So there we have it: necessity, disproportionality, proportionality. Could you elaborate, Professor Bell, about the legal situation here? Because clearly people can argue either way.
And there is international law on self-defense, and the international law is more or less this: a country that's subjected to an armed attack, whether that armed attack comes from another state or from a terrorist organization like Al-Qaeda, or in this case Hamas, is entitled to defend itself, defend its citizens. There are some general requirements that are thought to apply in international law, which and necessity and proportionality in this sense are very, very close in the laws of self-defense. The state that is acting in self-defense is only supposed to use that amount of force that is necessary for its military objective of subduing the enemy. So in order for Israel to act proportionately to the military need in its self-defense, it has to use only so much force as is necessary to destroy Hamas. Now, has Israel exceeded that? Plainly not. It hasn't gotten to that point yet. That is, to date, Israel, subject to enormous pressure, particularly from the Biden White House, has used less than necessary in order to destroy Hamas. And I'm sorry to say that the Biden White House appears to have as one of its aims to allow Hamas to survive this conflict. Anything that does so, any outcome in which Hamas survives is one in which it's clear that Israel used less force than was necessary or proportionate to its military need. I think that the arguments that Israel is using disproportionate force are mainly word games, where the listener is supposed to get confused about the fact that Israel and Hamas are not militarily equal. Israel has more force to bring to bear. And the listener is supposed to assume that it's unfair for Israel to use more force against these barbarian terrorists than they are able to use against Israel. And that, of course, is not the law of proportionality. It's not any part of international law. And so there is no real international legal argument about Israel using excessive force. It's one that's based on innuendo and a hope that the audience doesn't quite know the rules.
Thank you very much. Our next questioner is Rod Stone. Rod, please, can you come off mute?
Yeah. Hi, Professor Bell.
Hello.
I've listened to you intently, and obviously, as part of this forum, one has to listen to the positives that are from the Israeli side of things. Coming back to what's been referred to before by yourself and some of the participants, how does one change the views of the BBC, the ITV, and other television channels, which the vast majority of people in the UK especially listen to? The Israeli point of view never seems to come across, or very rarely. How does one change that? How does Israel start to market itself positively?
I really don't have an answer to how you change the BBC. I'm just confident, this is a bad answer, this is not what you want to hear, but I'm fairly confident that the answer, whatever it is not going to come from Israel. Right? It's the Brits that are going to have to change the BBC. It's not Israel. It makes no difference what Israel's marketing campaign is. The only way I think that there will be an overseas influence in favor of Israel is to try doing what Qatar does, which is to try bribing officials. I think that that would be a very dangerous strategy for Israel to pursue, and I don't even know that it would work. And so I don't think that there's anybody who's going to consider it in Israel, and good that it is so. Sorry, this is your problem. I don't have an answer for it.
Thank you. I've got two more questions which were asked in the chat, so I'm going to ask them. The first one came from Dean Warren Muslin, and Dean asks, do you think that a change in government in Israel would have any benefit in the region if such a change was ever to happen?
I think, well, a change will happen. It'll happen at the very latest after the next elections. It will probably happen beforehand, given the way Israeli coalitions work, which is they're perpetually unstable, even in wartime. Will it have a change? It depends on when it happens, but to the degree that Hamas can portray this as a victory for the Palestinian terrorists, it will have a devastating effect on Israel's deterrence. And I think that it will increase the scope of the war and its cost. I'm fairly confident, though, that that's not going to happen. That is, the main block right now on Israel fulfilling its war aims is not internal politics. I think it's the Biden White House, and that's going to change in some way or another as the months unfold, because the United States is in election season.
Okay, thank you. Our last question comes from our Vice Chairman, Lawrence Julius. Lawrence wants to know, how can you be confident that the charges from the ICC are just going to fade away and from the ICJ? Because both courts and the judges have shown to follow a political narrative and not judicial principles.
I'm not confident they're going to fade away. But let's start with the ICC. Okay, the ICC has never held a trial in absentia, and there are strong reasons why it's not going to, because I think that it would simply highlight its ineffectiveness. And so, if no Israeli shows up, there's going to be no trial, right? And no Israeli is foolish enough. No Israeli that's being charged is going to be foolish enough to submit themselves to this Dreyfus trial. They're not they're not going to be Dreyfus. And so, in that sense, the end of this is nothing in the ICC. Now, how much damage will be done before then? That depends on how much pressure is brought to bear on the ICC. They can either back away, that they will not. I'm not confident that there will be sufficient sanctions against the ICC to make them back away, but I'm hopeful that there will be, and I think there's a reasonably good chance there will be. As far as the ICJ is concerned, the ICJ is much more unmovable. It's going to stretch this out, the South Africa case, as long as possible, to keep issuing more and more farcical interim orders. And at some point, the Israeli team that is trying to get Israel, the legal and diplomatic team is trying to get Israel to always agree, will no longer be able to do that. And at that point, we will see what the ICJ is made of, and what it's made of is fluff. Right? The ICJ is not capable of enforcing its orders. More than half of the interim orders that it issues, and that includes against democratic law-abiding states, are ignored. Britain is currently ignoring an ICJ ruling. The United States has ignored several ICJ rulings, and of course, other countries, Myanmar, Russia, have ignored ICJ rulings. The ICJ will keep issuing its rulings, and we're going to keep ignoring them.
Thank you. Have you got time for two more questions, Avi?
Please go ahead.
Right. First one from Elizabeth Belisha, who asks, would it be a problem in international law if Israel would stop humanitarian aid until hostages get the same aid and are visited by the ICRC?
So here's the rule on humanitarian aid. In certain wartime situations, and I think arguably these are the wartime situations we're facing right now, all the parties to the war are required to facilitate humanitarian aid to the civilian population. And that is so long as there's no reasonable fear that the aid will be diverted to help the enemy. Now, in the situation that you have in the Gaza Strip, it's fairly clear that almost all the aid is diverted to help the enemy, to help Hamas. And therefore, under international law, it's fairly clear that Israel has no duty whatsoever to facilitate the supply lines to the Gaza Strip. I'll add that there's because that the fear is that it's going to be diverted not to just the enemy, but to a terrorist organization, to Hamas. And because there are duties in international law not to provide even passive support to terrorist organizations, I would argue that not only is Israel permitted not to facilitate humanitarian aid, it's actually forbidden to provide such aid. Now, what can you do in situations like that? So it would seem to me that the obvious answer, and the one that is the United States is trying very, very strongly to avoid hearing, is to move people out of the place in which they're human shields, out of the range of the war, in order to give them temporary refuge until the end of the fighting, and to a place where the aid will not be diverted. But to do that, it would require saying something that the United States is not willing to say, and to take actions that the United States is not willing to undertake. But I don't think that Israel has any requirement. In fact, Israel might be forbidden to permit aid. Now, that said, I think that there is a different issue about why it is you're cutting off aid. So if you're cutting off aid because of your fear of diversion, which is well-founded, or because Hamas is a terrorist organization, that's well-founded. If you're doing this as a form of political coercion, which is what that would be, I'm not sure it's the best tool.
Okay, thank you. The last question of the evening. Why did Bibi Netanyahu allow Qatar to give Hamas $30 million a month for 10 years, which Hamas spent on building tunnels and rockets?
So I think that we have to ask the question, why is it that Israeli leaders, why did the Israeli military, why did the Israeli secret services, why did Israeli defense ministers, why did the Israeli governments over the years allow money to go into the Gaza Strip, knowing that it was going to be diverted to Hamas? It's the same question we have today. Like, why is Israel allowing supplies to go into the Gaza Strip, even though we know it's going to Hamas? And the reason that they did it in the past, the reason they're doing it at present, is because of foreign pressure and the mistaken belief, that by allowing Hamas to be resupplied and refunded, that will lessen anti-Israel and pro-terrorist demands in the West. And there was also this, in Israel, they call it the conception. There was this mistaken idea in the security forces that Hamas was a party with which a deal could be reached, even if not directly, where it was more interested in governing the Strip than it was in fighting with Israel. By the way, the same conception was held not only about Hamas, it was held about the Hezbollah in Lebanon. I think that conception has been entirely destroyed, at least among the Israeli public. But unfortunately, if you look around the West, it's still widely held. This belief that the terrorist organizations that target Israel are more interested in civilian flourishing than they are in attacking Israel. And I think it's really important that we break that conception. I think that it's important that we stop international pressure on Israel to supply Hamas. But we're seeing it. I mean, it's one of the things we're talking about. The ICC is proposing criminal charges against Netanyahu and the Israeli Defense Minister Gallant for not giving enough supplies to Hamas. And so we have to break that internationally. And obviously, after the war is done, we're going to have to ask ourselves, like all the Israeli leadership, elected leadership, and the security bureaucratic leadership fell into this devastating preconception.
Great. Well, that question was from Kay Bagon. Thank you, Kay. In a minute, I'm going to ask our Managing Director, Steve Winston, to propose a vote of thanks. Before then, just some brief announcements. 3 points I want to announce. Firstly, on the 18th of June, which is a Tuesday in the evening, we're going to have a political hustings where we're going to have 5 speakers, one from each of the 5 main political parties: Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem, Green and Reform UK. All of the 5 speakers will be prospective parliamentary candidates in constituencies where there is a high Jewish population. And the purpose of the hustings will be to discuss Jewish issues relating to the general election. That's Tuesday, the 18th of June. We're in the middle of gathering the speakers. We've got 3 out of 5 so far. We're just finishing off. And then, of course, we'll circulate the full details. That's the first thing. The second thing, the other meeting we're planning in the very near future, and we're fixing a date, is we've got a very senior person from the BBC coming to speak to us. And it'll be a great opportunity for our members and friends to ask the BBC some very serious questions. They're very happy to speak to us, by the way. They seem more than happy to speak to us. We're just now fixing the date. The third thing I want to announce is we've done already 2 trips to Israel, solidarity trips to Israel already. Our third one is going to take place in early September. I would urge you all to apply to come. 3 points about it. Firstly, our trips are usually cheaper than others. Secondly, they always contain a meeting with a senior government minister. We had our last trip had a meeting with Amir Ohana, the Speaker of the Knesset. And the third thing about our trips, which is a bit different from everyone else, is we usually take with us, embedded in our group, somebody active in the media who gives us a lot of publicity. So the last one we had Andre Walker, who some of you will know is a big Talk TV presenter. He presents 4 times a week on Talk TV, and he gave us a great deal of publicity. So I urge you all to consider coming on the September, I think it's the 2nd week of September, the trip. And finally, any of you who are not yet members, please join www.nja.org.uk. While some of our meetings are open to non-members, there are others that are only open to members. So really, I really would urge, it's only £10 a year. I really would urge everyone who's not a member, please, to join. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Gary. And thank you, Professor Avi Bell. This is now the 2nd time since the horrors and the massacres of October the 7th that you've addressed us. And, you know, this evening, I've seen from comments in the chat that, you know, it's really valued, and you've imparted a lot of necessary information to the NJA staff, and to all of our members and supporters. So on behalf of us all, thank you very much for that. It certainly does feel at times here, and I'm sure you know, the same goes for in Israel as well, that Israel is damned if it does and damned if it doesn't. And it can be very depressing at times and feel like it's at the moment a tsunami of lawfare against Israel, which is essentially what you've addressed this evening. You know, we can only hope that things will improve, and that the hostages, however many are still being held captive, will somehow find their way home to Israel. But let's see what happens. You know, until then, we will continue to fight the good fight, as you are as well. So really, you know, on behalf of us all, thank you very much. Thank you for giving up your time during this week. I'm very aware that you are doing many events and, you know, giving your knowledge here, there and everywhere. So really a very sincere thanks from all of us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a great pleasure and a great honor.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, and I wish everybody a wonderful evening. Thank you.